This video is sponsored by Squarespace, and you'll hear more about them later in the video. The wheel in Game of Thrones personifies monarchy and a never-ending power struggle of obtaining the Iron Throne, a system that fosters oppression, corruption, and war. This type of government can work, as evidenced in Westeros' past, but ages of peace are brittle and can be obliterated by one bad king, creating a catalytic spark of rebellion. This is what Daenerys Targaryen triumphantly declares she wants to destroy. Yet, in a tragic twist of irony, she ultimately perpetuates the very cycle she loathes, attempting to assert herself as another despotic ruler. The tragedy of her character is being yet another figure on this wheel that gets crushed. In an attempt to realize this goal, Tyrion establishes a system of 16 High Lords choosing the king. But this doesn't break the wheel, it merely reshapes it into something even more susceptible to corruption. For this section of the video, we're going to go in depth about how bad the system is, given that this was supposed to be the primary solution to breaking the wheel. And from doing this, we can better understand how to properly break it. To start, Tyrions Solution has two massive flaws. The first one being, with a handful of selectively important figures, you can now easily manipulate the voting pool. The entire point of Game of Thrones is putting a magnifying glass on how corrupt people can be in this system. Everyone has their own ambition, and with this new system in place, the council can easily fall into chaos. Lords sending assassins after one another, bribery, blackmail, ransoming, general threats, you name it, it will happen. The faceless assassins are basically going to be working overtime, or there's going to be a lot more blood and cheese going on. As an example, if this system was employed in the beginning of the show, Littlefinger would most likely become king if he had a seat. Or maybe Varys would be more motivated to stop him, but in no way would a person worthy become king. It's kind of funny because everyone who would have been on that council besides Ned would have been blatantly corrupt. Seeing Tywin Lannister and Olenna Tyrell conniving at their prime would have been legendary, and I think that concept alone for seeing this council implemented in the beginning of the show would make for a good what if video. So this highlights the point immediately in which this system only works if everyone is honorable. This entire council has to vote in good faith and choose someone who would objectively be the best ruler for Westeros, and not, you know, someone they personally want to be king to further their own self-interest. This would inherently compromise everyone to vote in bad faith. With that said, it's insane that Tyrion suggests this given his extensive experience in the trenches of King's Landing Season 2. No one is trustworthy and they're all pursuing their own agenda. Of all characters, Tyrion should be vehemently against this method of choosing a king. This is also just looking at this specific issue from a micro level, because from a macro level, every major kingdom throughout Game of Thrones' story carries out some kind of devious plot. The Tyrells assassinating Joffrey, Dorne going through a coup, the Freys and Boltons butchering the Starks for control of the North, the Lannisters are at each other's throats and treat everyone as an enemy, the Greyjoys have a god complex, Lysa is batshit crazy and killing Jon Arryn is a normal Tuesday for her, and even someone as honorable as Stannis commits kinslaying. The amount of morally good houses to actually vote on this council is extremely small. Not to mention that those few good lords, since they wouldn't be playing the Game of Thrones, would easily get chewed up and spat out like Ned Stark. So, in essence, this is a system that reinforces the worst aspects of politicking and would make it significantly worse because every house now has a chance at becoming the king, utterly amplifying the inner drive of each lord's ambition. Imagine this council with 16 Littlefingers. It would be absolute chaos. The other issue, which is just as wild of an oversight as the last one, is who's on the council. And before we proceed with this point, let's label everyone, since some of these lords aren't even identified in the show.
Who are you people?
From left to right, we have Sam the Slayer, someone who's classified as a Riverlands Lord, which there are a ton of houses this guy can be from, like the Blackwoods, Brackens, Mallisters, but most likely this is whoever ended up claiming the twins, assuming Arya actually killed every Frey in existence. Let's just call him Joe Definitely Not Frey. Then we have Edmure Tully, the Skylar sisters, Brienne of Tarth, Davos Seaworth, Gendry Baratheon, Lord Oon, who apparently has his own wiki page, but even they don't know who the hell he is. He's just vaguely from the Stormlands. The next guy is a Northern Lord, and since we've never seen him before, he's probably taken over the Dreadfort. Then there's Yara Greyjoy, Oberyn Martell's stunt double, Robin Arryn, Jan Royce, and another Vale Lord, possibly House Grafton from Gulltown. Every other source of information I checked just states, yeah man, we have no idea who these people are. Which essentially stems into a general writing issue in that this is one of the most pivotal scenes in the show, and the fact that we don't know who a third of these characters are is insane. It illustrates the point of the complete lack of depth the later seasons have, where David and Dan don't bother with giving characters simple introductions. I don't know why they couldn't have someone announce each person in attendance so the audience wouldn't be confused, but this is going off topic. There are like a dozen issues with this scene that don't even relate to the topic of breaking the wheel, so sorry if my ADHD-riddled brain goes on side tangents. So now that we've vaguely figured out who these random people are, why are these the High Lords that have been chosen? Davos from House Seaworth, a newly formed house that everyone openly mocks, gets a seat on this legendary council?
I'm not sure I get a vote, but aye.
This begs the question that if House Seaworth gets a seat, then why doesn't every other minor house get one? Which there are hundreds of them. This basically would universally piss off every house because now the Onion Knight is more important than the entire realm of lords, whose houses have been around for centuries. If you did have a council with a select few lords choosing the king, then the only fair option would be just the great houses. Which again is still flawed, but it's absolutely insane how disproportionate the spread of votes is. I guess the Starks of Winterfell get 3 votes here, along with there being another Northern Lord in attendance. Unless if Bran and Arya are just spectating for funsies and don't get a vote. Then the Vale gets 3 votes, the Stormlands get 4, the Riverlands get 2, and the Reach, Iron Islands, and Dorne get 1. The Westerlands and Crownlands currently have 0. It feels like David and Dan don't even think about equal representation across Westeros, and just wanted to prioritize having recognizable characters present. So, with the spread of votes on the map, a Stark has an extremely high chance of becoming King of Westeros every election. Which is hilarious considering that this is the side that killed the Queen, and Grey Worm just watches this mummer's farce unfold to give the Starks complete control of Westeros. Along with the North also gaining their own independence and no longer having to pay King's Landing taxes? Like, what? How can anyone here be okay with this? This is the most blatantly obvious and frictionless power grab of the century. Why are there not more lords in attendance? What about representation from the Westerlands, Crownlands, more lords from the Reach, or houses like Hightower not even being here? You'd think at a fundamental baseline that every region of Westeros would have an equal share of votes to cast. Which even that is still flawed because certain regions are allies and would strictly vote for their own friends. This also begs the question of how would you get a seat on this council? Bronn of House...
You wouldn't know him.
Probably will get a seat, and maybe other regions will get more share of votes, which might fix this issue, but we still have the corruption problem permeating in the background. Overall, this seems like David and Dan know virtually very little about the world they've been adapting for over a decade. Before breaking the wheel, let's talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace, one of the best services for creating any website to fulfill your needs. An upcoming holiday that could make for a creative usage of a website is Mother's Day. Making a website that features all the happy moments you've spent together while going down memory lane could be a fun way to use Squarespace. You can upload any videos of your happy times together, a large selection of photos from the past, and most importantly, Squarespace has multiple classy template designs to make sure your mother doesn't judge you for bad taste. The possibilities for creating the website of your dreams are endless, and if you want to make your own website, then head to squarespace.com and use my discount code SupercutsDelight to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now let's get back to the video. So now that we've painfully established that Tyrion created a unicycle of a wheel with a system of electing a king, let's talk about how to actually break the wheel. One form of government that may seem like the correct one is democracy, the system that Samuel proposes. However, this is another insane solution that wouldn't mesh well with this time period at all. It feels like David and Dan try to pass off that Samuel is way ahead of his time with his progressive thinking. But I guess David and Dan didn't consider the notion that 99% of the population of Westeros is completely uneducated, most of whom are illiterate as well. Even Davos didn't know how to read until the end of season 3.
Can't say I've ever met a literate stonemason.
This is a world where a person's value is built on their trade, and Edmure Tully saying,
Maybe we should give the dogs a vote as well.
is an improvement in some cases. Maybe breaking the wheel is having the puppy bowl select the king. But yeah, a democracy in this day and age is crazy, and that also doesn't go into the point of the logistics of casting votes. Like, does the entire continent have to drop what they're doing and travel to the closest kingdom, which could take weeks, since not everyone has horses, or are people voting by Raven? Also, the common folk have no idea about other lords outside of their own liege lord. This isn't modern day where we have global news, and people in Westeros primarily get their news from rumors and taverns.
They say our dragons are bigger than Aegon's.
Oh shit.
Then finally, whichever region has the highest population would probably keep winning.
How many people live here?
Million, give or take.
That's more people than the entire north.
So, since a democracy here wouldn't work at all, we have to go back to that fundamental question of what the wheel is, and it portrays a form of government that is a feudal absolute monarchy. Basically just one king rules everyone, and he has vassals from different regions that govern their land and resources. The next question is, when was the system of government established? And that would be after Aegon's conquest, when he conquered 6 of the 7 major kingdoms and created King's Landing, where he'd be the monarch of Westeros. Prior to this, there wasn't a singular monarch who ruled everything. When the Andals initially came to Westeros, this period was referred to as the Age of the 100 Kingdoms. Through the centuries, every house was plagued with war for territory and resources, until 7 major kingdoms came out on top. When Aegon arrived, Westeros was fractured and there was little cooperation between houses. So his conquest, while also being self-serving, was meant to unite and make Westeros stronger. This general idea of combined strength and unity throughout Westeros is what everyone deems as the positive side of having a monarch.
The king in the north!
However, I think that's achievable without having one. The current political landscape of Westeros happens to be in a state where every major kingdom is on relatively decent to good terms and are actively choosing a new king together. So instead of doing that, have them create an alliance in which if they ever get attacked by an outside threat, or if one of the kingdoms defects and tries to conquer Westeros, then all the other kingdoms will band together to stop them. This is basically what happened during the Greyjoy Rebellion when Robert Baratheon was king. Everyone came together to smash the rebellion, and it was a very swift defeat. Having an alliance between all the major kingdoms could easily stop something like this in the future. It achieves the same strengths of having a monarch rule Westeros without its major downsides. So now, if we happen to have a crazy and unhinged king, their power won't be anywhere near as strong as that king being in King's Landing ruling everyone, thus minimizing their damage on the continent. No longer will we have a Joffrey Baratheon throwing the entire realm into a chaotic war, or a mad king who wants to nuke the kingdom. Having a bad king assume power is fundamentally an aspect of when it happens and not if it happens. You may also think that this system would immediately make certain kingdoms stand out as being the most powerful, like Highgarden. However, most kingdoms or territories are self-sufficient in creating food, which is Highgarden's strength. Food supply only becomes an issue under 2 circumstances. One being wartime, which is heavily abundant throughout Game of Thrones' timeline, thus making the Tyrells the most powerful house, and food is also critical during winter. So the Tyrells, or Bronn I should say, would primarily be making money when there's a demand crisis, which would be during winter under normal circumstances of peace. I'm also kind of confused about the whole gold storage aspect, considering that Highgarden was raided and plundered, so Bronn coming into the story should theoretically not be insanely rich as the show is implying. How is he supposed to be lending everyone gold if Cersei took all of it and gave it to the Iron Bank? Then in terms of every other major kingdom, they all have their own strengths or resources. Like the North has a major supply of trees where they can export lumber to the Iron Islands as an example, which they should need because they can't make fleets out of thin air. So now they can build ships that they can then sell, instead of stealing ships and raiding. I imagine Dorne exports lots of wine, there's probably lots of trade going through King's Landing that could be taxed, which I guess King's Landing could now be its own kingdom. But in general for the economy, every area has some kind of strength or weakness for trade. Even if one kingdom does stand above the rest in terms of monetary value, their aspirations for domination would still be put in check by all the other major kingdoms' combined strength. This general system represents breaking the wheel, and I think fits the specific time period the best. It removes a monarch who plunges the realm into misery and despair, and instead disperses that power amongst the continent somewhat equally. And there can definitely be additional terms in this alliance to ensure an era of peace. There's genuinely a lot you can dive into in that regard. Obviously, like any society, nothing is perfect. You'll always have people driven by greed, ambition, or purely driven by their id, and are flat out psychopathic. It's unrealistic to expect perfection and for there to be no conflict, and instead, we have to try to mitigate that as much as possible and suppress its impact and damage on the population. Not even our own world, given how advanced technologically we are, is without flaws. Countries are still at war, there are places that are genuinely terrifying to live in, and even close allies can clash at times. This is the human condition, and that's something that isn't fixable. But going back to breaking the wheel, this is how you'd theoretically break it. However, can it tangibly be broken in-world by its characters? Now, I feel as though had David and Dan not been writing these characters, this could have happened, since one of the biggest flaws of those later seasons were people acting completely out of character. Tyrion on his own should have come to the conclusion that absolute monarchy is the wheel. All of his experience points him in this direction.
I've had nothing to do but think these past few weeks about our bloody history.
He literally disobeys and stands up against Daenerys, a now crazy tyrannical ruler. So why would Tyrion now want to risk another situation like this by choosing Bran as king, or to keep the system in place for it to inevitably repeat itself? This now implies that Tyrion didn't learn anything throughout his entire arc. Joffrey, Tywin, Cersei, and Daenerys were all terrible in their own way. It's a crazy notion that Tyrion would now want to gamble with electing a new king. And he barely even knows the person that he elects. Tyrion has one conversation with Bran that we don't even get to see, so Tyrion choosing Bran on the basis that he has a good story is mind-bogglingly dumb. It's ironic that the only character who's not even a character that understood what the wheel was Drogon. He somehow knew Daenerys' goal, even though he wasn't present for her whole monologue about it. Maybe Tyrion was too drunk and wasn't paying attention. But Drogon destroying the Iron Throne eliciting no response from anyone renders this massive narrative point as being pointless. If the show was written realistically, the characters would have realized the problems within their own society, and all the lords at that great council would have addressed the problems of having a monarch rule everything, something that Game of Thrones highlights constantly throughout its story. In terms of cooperation, there is still some hate between some of them, like Arya openly threatening to kill Yara, but I can see Tyrion convincing everyone that this is the best path forward for Westeros. That should have been his monologue and not him getting brainwashed by Bran propaganda. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments if there are any better ways at breaking the wheel, or if I ran into any fatal flaws that I didn't address. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and have a nice day. Thanks to the High Lords of Patreon, Logan Farmer, and Simply Put.